Well, let me begin with the first one. What is your personal worldview? And my answer to this sort of sets up my answer to the other questions. Now, one thing you might add, one thought I had when I saw this question was, well, what exactly would a worldview be? And in one sense, a worldview might be your idea of what kinds of things there are in the world. But I think, for the purposes of this discussion, the idea is what's the valuable stuff? What's the stuff that gives us meaning in this world? What is my sense of what the valuable stuff is and what gives us meaning? And then that question, in turn, could be, divided into two parts. One might be, okay, what are the things that are the valuable things? Like, eating Chipotle burritos, playing basketball. What are the valuable things? The other is a more meta question, like, what makes something valuable at all? Like, what makes it the case that something's valuable? I'm not going to explicitly address that second question, though it's going to be implicit in the way I answer the first question, what I take the valuable things to be. And the way I want to answer this question is through the lens of social roles and institutions that I find myself in. So my idea is that basically there are three basic institutions and roles that sort of make up my worldview and my idea of what the valuable stuff is. The largest role is encased in the social institution of our political community, our state. And my role in this is a role of a citizen. And my sense is that in contemporary states like Canada, maybe to a lesser degree in the United States where I'm from, there's a value that inheres in this political community, and it's this fundamental value of equality. And it's this basic idea that each person should be treated with equal concern and respect. And what that means, it doesn't mean that in every action that I take as I participate in this community that I treat every person with respect, but rather, so it doesn't mean that I should take everyone into account in everything I do. Rather, it doesn't mean that, because I shouldn't. Rather, there's certain special relationships that are part of my good that require me not treating everyone with equal concern and respect. My relationship with my wife, with my children, my relationship with my children. Those are relationships where I don't do that. I place their interests first. And there are others where I place my interests first, as opposed to others. But nonetheless, in this political community, it makes it possible for me to go on in a way that treats everyone with equal concern and respect. And how so? Well, what it does is, if done well, and it sort of approximates a system of laws where there are spheres in which each of us, certain compossible spheres made up of traditions and laws and rules that enable each of us to live our lives of partiality in ways that, as a totality, manifest equal concern and respect for everyone. Basically, there are laws in place that we support as citizens in this larger political community that make it possible for each to pursue their own lives in accordance with a system that gives equal concern and respect to each. So there's this fundamental value that inheres and gives meaning to my life in this political community. I participate in this community that realizes this value of treating persons with equal concern and respect. So that's one institution, one role, my role of citizen, of participating and supporting and helping put into place that kind of, albeit helping just a bit, putting into place that kind of institution. A second role I have is a role in civil society. More narrowly, in my case, my role in civil society is a role in the institution here in the university, and my role in this institution is a role as professor. I'm a professor, and there's certain things that I do that, given my station, can imbue my life with meaning. I research, I help my students out in various ways, I teach. All those things make for a valuable life for me and a contribution to the society in general. And so in this other institution, this civil institution of the university, there's a locus of an important value that I participate in. I play one small part in that larger project. Similarly, there's yet a third institution that I participate in, the family. And there's many ways that I plug into families, but my primary roles are my roles as a father and a husband. And there, I have this way of participating in this group project, which is this relationship with my children and my spouse, through which I achieve a kind of meaning and a kind of value, a value particular to those relationships, those very special relationships of mutual emotional support and nurturing. Okay, so then my worldview then is that we achieve meaning and value by participating in these social institutions, playing roles within them. And we're all fortunate enough right now, I think, to more or less have pretty well-functioning, happy institutions that make lives of meaning and value possible. Not everyone's so fortunate. But my thought is that meaning and value largely emanates from those. Okay, so that's my worldview, and it supports, I think, my answer to the other questions that have been put to us. So let me move on to the second question. The second question is, why do you think discussions on spirituality and religion are important? Now, the first thing I might say is just very general, kind of meta comment, that spirituality and religion are activities that you find throughout human history. Important central activities in human history, and these are things that we've engaged in for a very long time. And it's important to understand what that activity is and why people engage in it, because it's important just for us to understand ourselves. It's part of the project of human self-understanding, just understanding what these things are. That's sort of the meta answer. Now, a second answer is one that relies on a particular notion of what these things are, religion and spirituality. Now, I'm not particularly expert when it comes to giving an answer to what exactly spirituality and religion are, but I'll hazard something that I don't think is completely implausible. The first thing I'd want to say is it seems to me that spirituality and religion are two distinct things, though they might be related, the way I think they are related. Let me start with spirituality. Spirituality is an orientation to something, not necessarily a body of doctrine, which I think religion might be, but I'll get to that in a second. Spirituality is an orientation, I think, to the idea that there is something larger than oneself, of which one is a part. And that larger thing imbues one's life with meaning and value. Now, I think that what I described with respect to social roles and these larger institutions it's a kind of vehicle for spirituality understood in this way. So I feel like I get something like this. I achieve something like spirituality by participating in these larger institutions and realizing value in these larger projects that are affiliated with these institutions and getting meaning in my life from these larger institutions. A further thought I might point out is this idea is that this isn't my original idea. I think this reflects this general thought that human beings, the kind of beings we are, is species beings. We're beings that live in communities, like wolves or bees, in a very particular way. But that's the kind of thing we are. And spirituality, I think, is a kind of highly complex, rationally complex manifestation of our species being. It's a manifestation of our tendency to associate together in these larger projects and to commune together in these larger projects. Plus this added idea that we achieve value, in a sense, of meaning from them. Okay. Now, I think religion might be one way of channeling or fulfilling this spiritual urge. And I think of religion, though, I'm not going to go to the wall on this, is religion's basically a kind of body of doctrine that situates oneself in a larger whole and a larger source of value. And typically, probably not in every single case, religions will place a deity at the center of this body of doctrine in one way or another, some sort of deity that plays an important role in grounding the doctrine as a source of value. All right. The next question then. Is spirituality dangerous? Is religion dangerous? And I think it might be, but it need not be. So my thought is that spirituality, as I understand it, this need, this urge to participate in this larger project, this larger whole, and achieve meaning in that way, might be dangerous if it attaches to some object that's pernicious, if it attaches to a pernicious group project and putative value. If you achieve meaning in the participation in a large group project that entails harming, excluding, marginalizing others, i.e. not treating them with equal concern and respect, and undermining the possibility of a society that does so, then spirituality could be dangerous. Spirituality could be dangerous. And in fact, I think spirituality has been dangerous in this way in the past, though it need not always be. One example, just an easy example, particularly given where I come from, there have been roles and institutions in which people have achieved meaning, or a false sense of meaning anyway, in these pernicious ways, such as the role of a white man in the American South, in institutions that are, that have, you have kind of institutions of slavery and this sort of thing. Now, I think religion could be dangerous for similar reasons. Insofar as you have a religion that might construct a body of doctrine that unifies one group, while at the same time leads the group to engage in a group project that withholds equal concern and respect for others. And this has happened sometimes. I think it's an important thing to point out that a distinction between northern and southern Baptist congregations in the United States. Southern Baptist congregations in the United States were highly supportive of the institution of slavery and embodied and incorporated that into their doctrine. Now that's been disavowed, but there was a significant part of history where religion was connected to this particularly pernicious group project. So that's a possibility. But of course, not all religions do this, and some manifestly are in the service of the project of making possible equal concern and respect for all God's creatures. So my thought is, look, religion and spirituality have the potential to be pernicious or dangerous in that they create and sustain institutions that undermine equal concern and respect for all. But yet other religions don't do that. In fact, they support it. In fact, and in many different ways. All right. I think I'm going to leave my comments at that. There are two further questions, but I think at least implicit in what I've said are answers to these two further questions. The penultimate question being, if spirituality is dangerous, are there possible positive implications of spirituality being dangerous? And the second is explore spirituality and the effect on the individual person rather than society. I guess that last question, I feel like you can't really pull apart spirituality from society. It's deeply connected. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stephan. And now, Dr. Kirk, would you like to make your opening remarks, please?
Sure. Well, first of all, I would like to thank as well the organizers of this event, the Veritas Forum, and all the people who are involved in it. And it's also a privilege to participate in this discussion with Dr. Scaffa. Now, I would like to just say as to why this is important. When you consider the number of people in the world and throughout history that have been religious of one sort or another, there seems to be an indication that there is a spiritual component to humanity when you look at the number of religions and the number of people involved in it. And even as the number of people in North America who are involved in one of the traditional religions is declining, what we're seeing is an increase in the number of people in North America who are embracing more superstitious beliefs. And for this reason, I think that discussions like we're having this evening are important, and it's a good thing to have them. I want to begin with defining a couple of terms, and then I also will proceed then to briefly explain my own worldview. And then I want to address what I see the main question being, and that is spirituality or religion dangerous? So let me begin with defining a couple of terms. I would take spirituality, and these are just my own perspectives on these terms. I would take spirituality as the ability to perceive the things that are not reduced to merely molecules and the laws of physics. For example, it would be the ability to discern right from wrong, the ability to perceive beauty, and the sense of the supernatural. So this would be more of an ability to perceive, a sixth sense, as you will, but not in the normal sense of the term sixth sense. Religion is a little bit different. It is how one expresses and practices one's spirituality. It could be formal, as in having a well-defined core set of beliefs, or it could be very informal and vague, and a lot of Canadians today have more of an informal and vague application of their own spirituality. I would suggest, and this is arguable of course, but I would suggest that spirituality without action is relatively benign. It's only when one begins to act on the basis of one's spirituality that the potential for danger or benefit arises. And so for this reason, I would like to focus my main remarks on the question, is religion dangerous as opposed to spirituality, if religion is the application of spirituality? Now, to clarify my own worldview, my own spiritual and religious beliefs, I would say that I was a Christian, but I find it's very important to clarify what I mean by that. I need to define what I mean by the essence of Christianity, and then clarify what I mean by Christian in that context. So the essence of Christianity, as I see it, would have a few different components. The first is that there is a God that exists, who is not only the origin of the universe, but the origin of every good thing given and every perfect gift. And when you think about that, he is the origin of beauty, flawless beauty, indescribable honor and love, the origin of flawless justice, the origin of music and art, the laws of nature, and so forth. The problem is that if we have violated our own moral intuitions, then how much further short have we fallen of a being who is the personification of justice and purity itself? So this creates a problem for God. So part of the essence of Christianity is resolving this problem as to how flawless justice can be satisfied for our moral shortcomings, so that then perfect love and honor can be satisfied. So that at the core of Christian belief would be this idea that God actually became a human being to fully satisfy the demands of justice for all of humanity, so that he could then fully satisfy the demands of honor and love for humanity. And he did that in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. So to become an authentic Christian, one must accept God's pardon for our moral violations that he offers us through Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ. That step, if taken, is what is described as putting your faith in Christ for forgiveness of sins and the acceptance of eternal life. Essentially, what I did was stake everything, including my eternal destiny, on Jesus Christ and what he did. And the result, and this is the final point in the essence of Christianity, the result is that one then becomes spiritually alive. God begins to change the person from the inside out and make that person into the kind of person he intended or created that person to be. So that would be what I call the essence of Christianity. And so when I say I'm a Christian, it's within that context, but there's one other thing I need to clarify, and that is two kinds of Christians that Jesus talked about, because I would only be one of the two kinds. One I would refer to as the contradictory Christian. It would be those people who would claim to be Christians and actually be religious in the sense of observing certain rules and rituals and perhaps attending church from time to time, but the way that they live contradicts the teachings of Christ. And the other kind of Christian I would describe as simply the authentic Christian. That would be those people who have sincerely put their faith in Jesus Christ and who are now experiencing a personal relationship with God as a result. And the primary distinction between the two was summarized by Jesus of Nazareth in one sentence. He said, with regard to all the people claiming to be followers of Christ, he said, "You will know them by their fruit." In other words, you will know them, they will be a steady and ongoing positive change in that person's life that unfolds over months and years. So when I say I'm a Christian, I would claim to be an authentic Christian, a person who has actually taken this very seriously and put my faith in Christ. Now let me move on to the main question in my mind of this discussion, that is religion dangerous? My short answer is yes and no. To clarify, I will argue that there are at least two ways that religion can be a dangerous thing, and at least two ways where it can be of great benefit. So let me move on into my first danger. The first danger is that religion is like national security. It can be misused to justify behavior that would otherwise be unacceptable, as we've seen unfold over this past year in the case of the NSA, after the revelation of Mr. Snowden. People do bad things. Often they will attempt to justify what they do by doing it in the name of something that's respected in that society or valued in that society. For example, in the case of Christianity, there are three famous atrocities that were committed in the name of Christianity. Cases where Christianity, I would argue, was misused to justify unacceptable behavior. And the stats I'm going to provide are from Professor Rommel, a political scientist who worked at the University of Hawaii, whose specialty was in mass murder, or actually the study of mass murder. For the Crusades, he found that, and these are upper estimates here, there were as many as 1 million people killed in the medieval Crusades. Now that would be Christians killing Muslims, Muslims killing Christians, but we could argue that the Christians started it, so ultimately they're responsible. So 1 million. The Spanish Inquisition killed right around 350,000 people. And finally, witch killings through burning, drowning, and so forth. It's thought that there were as many as 100,000 women killed because they were accused as witches. So that brings the total, the upper limit for that total, to be just over 1.4 million people who were killed either in the name of Christianity or Christianity was used to try and justify those actions. Now, when you hear instances like that, there is a question you really need to ask yourself, and that is this. Is that actually what Jesus taught? Is that how he treated people? Jesus said that the second greatest commandment was to love your neighbor as yourself. Is that loving your neighbor as yourself? Or is that an example of a contradictory Christian? So people have committed atrocities, attempting to justify them in the name of religion, and I've taken Christianity since that's what my worldview is, when in fact the atrocities that they committed were in flat contradiction to the teachings of Jesus Christ. At best, this would be an example of the contradictory Christian spoken of by Jesus. The second danger of religion in general is that it can be like taking a wrong turn in a burning building or a sinking ship. New religions are being invented all the time, and possibly there is a new one being invented as we speak this evening. Now, they cannot all be true in virtue of the fact that when you look at their core beliefs, many of them are mutually contradictory. They can't all be true. Therefore, there must be a large number of religions that are, quite frankly, inventions of people. And at most, there can only be one that's completely true, at most. Now, given this state of affairs, if it is true that this life is only the first fleeting step of an eternal existence and that our eternal destiny hinges on where you place your faith, then placing your faith in a religion merely invented by human beings could be the most dangerous thing that is possible to do in this life. Similarly, there may be so many religions in the world that are invented by human beings that the person looking at them is bewildered, and they seem to have mutually contradictory beliefs. And the danger exists that they may actually conclude that all religions are bogus, in which case that would be a terrible mistake as well. It is like a burning building that has only one way out, or a sinking ship where only one corridor out of many leads to the surface, taking the wrong turn in your attempt to save your life. In this case, failing to choose the one authentic religion that actually leads to God would have consequences that last forever. And of course, this assumes there is one authentic religion that actually leads to God, and that's really another discussion. Now, I want to look at two benefits of religion. First one is that religion can produce behavior that benefits society. The belief that one's decisions and actions in this life have eternal consequences, and that there is a moral law that transcends civilizations and history, to which we will all be held accountable someday, can have a significant positive influence in the behavior of people that benefit society as a whole. For example, in a paper titled The Origin and Evolution of Religious Pro-Sociality, published in the journal Science in 2008, the authors noted that, and I quote, "Experimentally induced religious thoughts reduce rates of cheating and increase altruistic behavior among anonymous strangers. Experiments demonstrate an association between apparent profession of religious devotion and greater trust. Cross-cultural evidence suggests an association between the cultural presence of morally concerned deities and large group size in humans." In a more informal note, British journalist and atheist Matthew Paris wrote, and who had a lot of experience in Africa, stated, and I quote, "As a confirmed atheist, I've become convinced of the enormous contribution that Christian evangelism makes in Africa. Christians, black and white, working in Africa, do heal the sick, do teach people to read and write. The Christians were always different. Far from having cowed or confined its converts, their faith appeared to have liberated and relaxed them. There was a liveliness, a curiosity, an engagement with the world, a directness in their dealings with others that seemed to be missing in traditional African life. They stood tall." End of quote. A year or so ago in CTV News, they noted that the Christian Relief Agency, known as World Vision, gives more to third world relief than all the other charities in the United States combined. And many of those charities were Christian run as well. So the belief that there is a moral law that transcends societies, that we will be held accountable after death, and that our actions in this life actually have consequences in eternity, can produce behavior that is of great benefit to society. And finally, the last benefit will be more the individual benefit. For the individual, if it is actually possible to know the creator of the universe, the one who is the origin of beauty, the origin of honor and love, the one who is the origin of justice and music personified, and the one who is the origin of every good thing given and every perfect gift, if it's actually possible to know such a being, and if there is a true religion that actually makes this possible, and that's a big if, granted, but if there is, it would be the most wonderful thing that a person could ever possibly experience. In my own view, this benefit actually begins in this life. I've had a good life. I've experienced a lot of life's exciting things, but I would have to say that the most fulfilling thing I've ever experienced by far is the presence of God. Nothing compares with it. There's a quote from the Bible that states, "Things which eye has not seen and ear has not heard, which have not entered the heart of man, all that God has prepared for those who love him." So in conclusion, in answer to the question, is religion dangerous? I've said yes and no. It can be invoked in an attempt to justify evil actions, and if they're religions that are mere inventions of humanity, they can lead a person down the wrong road. But there are also pro-social benefits to the person and to society. And if it's actually possible to know God, and there's actually a true religion that leads there, then it might be the key to the most wonderful thing a person could ever actually experience.
Thank you, Dr. Scappa. Sorry, Dr. Durston. We've heard the opening remarks now, so now we're going to give our speakers an opportunity to respond, to reflect on what they've heard, and hopefully begin a dialogue that they'll have questions back and forth. So I'm going to ask Dr. Scaffa to make his response and offer or ask whatever questions you would like to, sir.
Sure. So I think there's a lot to sort of assess and process here and to kind of tee up a fruitful discussion. I think maybe the point of contact is really a basic one, and it goes back to sort of the preliminary questions. So maybe it's the conception of what spirituality is to begin with, and what the implications of the answer to that question, what those implications are for how we should lead a life and what our life's about. So the way I put it, I took spirituality to be the sense that there's something larger than us, that there's a larger project, that a larger reality that goes beyond our solitary life, that imbues our life with meaning and value. Now I take it that Dr. Durston's answer is to this fundamental question, what is spirituality? It's close, but it seems different. It might be worth exploring the differences, because it seemed like you had this thought that spirituality is this something like a special faculty. It's a sixth sense, as you put it. When you're spiritual, you're in touch with a part of reality that's not reducible to the laws of physics. And I think there is. We're in the same neighborhood, but these are different answers, and there are upshots from these different answers. Because my sense was, my account of what spirituality is doesn't entail anything like a sixth sense. It's something that's sort of, there, available to all of us, that kind of flows from our natural lives as a particular kind of special rational animal. Namely, it flows from this capacity to realize, and a drive to realize meaning and value through certain group projects. It comes from, spirituality is a reflection of our nature as species beings. And I take it, so tell me, I guess this is more of just opening up a question. What do you think of that difference in perspectives? What do you think of, am I characterizing your view correctly, what spirituality is? And how do you think they contrast?
Well, I think you've done as I said, this is my own definition of the word spirituality, so I think there's certainly a lot of room to hash this out and refine and fine-tune it. But I thought there was some similarity there as well. For example, you said it was an orientation to something larger than oneself.
Yeah.
Perhaps the difference would be in how much larger than oneself. Is if it's my thing is that if it's just reducible to physical reality, laws of physics and atoms and forces, then that's not really larger than what I'm already composed of, and it's not really larger than what the material world around us. I would take the larger than oneself part to extend beyond that, whereas I think you're really looking at the material world, I think.
Oh, yeah, I think so. I think that's a key distinction between, my thought is that spirituality doesn't necessarily have the sixth sense component.
Yeah.
It's just the sense that you belong to a larger project that imbues your life with meaning. And religion's one way, and a D&T infused religion is one way of realizing that particular project, that particular drive.
That reminded me of I was at the pub with some atheists just before Christmas, and we were actually discussing whether they should call it, is spirituality dangerous or religion? And some of the atheists said, well, am I spiritual? One atheist beside me says, I'm a very spiritual person. And so obviously the definition of what we mean by spirituality is, well, when I looked it up actually in Wikipedia, they said there isn't really any agreement on what this means. So I thought, well, fine, I'll make up my own then.
Right.
Just on my own intuitions. But I think that there is similarity, and that's the orientation to something larger. It's just what that larger thing is.
Right, and whether it's continuous with the natural world, or if it's something that you lose something if you don't entertain something beyond that, something that goes beyond that.
Yep.
And you know, this shouldn't just be merely pedantic. I mean, the big question should be: is there something important that's lost when you think of spirituality and that activity as something that's continuous with the natural world, as opposed to something that is not?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that is the big question, and I mean, that would be a whole different discussion by itself. Is there something out there that's larger than just the material world? But because of the nature of this event and the amount of time,
right.
I just limited to making the assumption that there is. And it's not just an assumption, it's been my experience. But then, of course, you know, some people claim that I'm irrational. So it might not carry a lot of weight with other people. I forget, Mr. Moderator, what am I supposed to also summarize at some point? Or
Dr. Scappa has a little bit more time
Okay.
if you still want to ask an additional question. Otherwise, we'll turn it over to Dr. Kirk.
Why don't I turn it over, and if there's time left at the end, I do have some other questions, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Okay. Well, I listened to your discussion on equality, concern, and equal concern and respect for everyone, and what I noticed was the similarity between that and the second greatest command Jesus gave, which was, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself," which is essentially equalizes all humanity. Were to treat everyone as I would treat myself. I just made that as an observation. Then you mentioned that we achieve meaning and value through participating in social institutions, including, you mentioned groups and projects, and you also mentioned relationships, I think, in terms of your family.
Yeah.
And my perspective is that the relationship aspect seems to be the essence of Christianity. The first command was your relationship with God, to love the one who's the origin of beauty and so forth with all your heart, soul, mind, and then to love your neighbor as yourself. So it's very, very relationship-centered. Groups and projects. Now that, I did have something I want to come back and ask you a question about that. Anything else? Yeah, I think that your discussion on is it dangerous or not, if it attaches to pernicious object, that would really open up, you know, what is a pernicious object? Would an object that's actually not pernicious appear to be pernicious to us if we have lack of information and so forth? The philosophers, as you well know, discuss these things at length. But I want to go back, I think. That's basically my summary of what I would want to point out here. But let's go back to your idea that we achieve meaning and value through not just relationships, but through group projects and what was it? Groups and projects, or group projects and institutions?
So all of these, I take it, are housed in institutions.
Yeah.
And I described three basic ones. These aren't categories original with me, but there's institutions of state, institution of civil society, and many institutions that make up civil society, like the workplace and volunteer organizations, those kind of things, and the institutions of the family. And you know, these are sort of ready-made vehicles that societies provide for realizing group projects of a particular sort. Without those institutions, these group projects aren't possible. These group projects are the source of meaning and value of particular lives.
Well, I guess,
and it stops there.
Yeah.
That's the end of the story. That's where you get value. That's where you get meaning. You don't need anything more to support that story of value and meaning.
Well, that raises a lot of interesting possible questions. The first thing I thought of is that I'm in a senior care home quite often, visiting my mother-in-law, and I see people in there who their friends have pretty much all died. They have no more things that they're involved in. Their family never comes to visit them. So really nobody cares for them anymore other than the people who are paid to change their diapers and feed them and so forth. Yep. Yet, from my perspective, that person is created in the image and likeness of God, and therefore, even if they are, no human cares about them, they have no projects, no institutions that they care about anymore. And it is quite sad sometimes to see the state of some of these senior citizens who are just terribly depressed because they're sensed nobody cares. So the question would be, well, what gives this person value if there are no groups or institutions that they can look at to give them value? Another example of a lone survivor would be, there are many cases where famine and war have wiped out the person's family. You see this child just stumbling across this wasteland, no institution, they got nothing, not even clothes. Yet from my perspective, they're still just as valuable as anyone else because the value is attached to God rather than to institutions. And does it not seem a little risky to attach one's value and significance to groups and institutions if the groups begin to marginalize you and set you aside, and as the track record of human history often does?
Right.
So, well, let me pause there.
Sure.
Is it not a risky thing to put your...
Yeah, I would want to distinguish between value in sort of a gentle sense and value from the sense of sort of a moral patient. So this person in the nursing home, they're valuable as a moral patient. They're someone who's owed equal concern and respect. They're owed these kinds. They must be valued and appreciated and taken care of as
who owes them, or what?
All of us, all humans do.
Okay,
But there's let me.
Yeah.
Then the other part would be, now there's a tragic possibility that many of us realize, and this is part of the difficulty of growing old in a world with our medical capacities. We outlive. Our bodies live on beyond the point where we can achieve meaning and value, our sense of a meaningful life, a valuable life through our institutions, because we can't do it anymore. We can just sit there in bed and reflect on maybe what happened in the past, but it's tragic and it's suffering. It's a kind of suffering. And it's a tragic possibility for human beings. Those persons are owed equal consideration and respect, but they are suffering, and they're suffering precisely because they've lost the possibility of sustaining, of realizing this distinctive human capacity, achieving meaning and value through participation in group projects.
I'm fascinated by your statement that they are. I mean, I would agree that they are owed that. The question is, why are they owed these things? What is it that, and you mentioned some sort of moral, I think you said moral, there's moral reasons to value a person.
That's right.
They are owed our respect, they're owed value and significance. I mean, speaking from looking at the animal world, for example, pragmatically speaking, when an animal just can't keep up, and I was raised in a rural area in Manitoba, it's not pretty what happens when they just can't keep up anymore. They first of all can exhaust the resources of the pack. The pack leaves them behind or kills and eats them, but it's a burden on the pack, and it can be, well, let's just stop at the burden on the pack. The pack it increases their chances of survival if they'll just leave these behind from pragmatic reasons, yet we feel that's morally wrong, that we somehow owe value. So what is it?
Well, it's morally wrong in the human context. I mean, the animal does nothing.
Yeah, we don't worry about that. We're just talking about humans here,
yeah.
Although I know that many people would be quite concerned about the animal.
Right.
But,
no, these are good questions, and a lot of moral philosophy is trying to give an account of what of these. Well, these are basically meta-ethical questions. What's the nature of these values? What makes the case that something's a value, something's not a value? There are many answers to this question. One that and more specifically, what makes something a moral value as opposed to, say, an aesthetic value, or all kinds of different kinds of values. And so there are a variety of answers. One answer is, there's a kind of divine command theory. That's one possibility, where something's valuable by fiat of some sort of deity. And that's a well-known answer with problems, but they all have problems. But there are certain problems with that answer. An answer that I favor is something that's kind of a naturalistic story, which is we have certain kinds of capacities, and we have certain kinds of possibilities of living in groups where each individual is flourishing, given the kind of being that it is. And one possibility for us that's conducive to individual and group flourishing is living in society where that manifests equal concern and respect for each. It allows, it gives possibilities for each being to flourish on its own. And interestingly, given the kind of creatures we are, it enables us to work in cooperation and flourish and produce all kinds of things in community. But this is completely a naturalistic story. But that there's a kind of naturalistic equilibrium state and potentiality of persons that locates value for that kind of being, and it's sort of the fundament. It's the fundament of morality and value for us, these rational beings.
Okay, so as you probably recall from C.S. Lewis, sometimes people tend to compare different moral ideas, and so you presented your moral idea here that there's some benefit in, let's say, the senior citizen who no longer can contribute anything, especially if they have dementia, nothing to society. They are a burden on the resources of the rest of society. And another, but yet we have a moral duty to value and cherish that person. Let's take another society whose the idea of morality is that it's morally wrong to cause deprivation for the rest of productive society if you have people that have outlived their usefulness and so forth, and then we commit, euthanasia or whatever, we dispense with them, and that's their moral theory. Now, you would probably say that your moral theory is better than the ones where anybody with dementia and no longer is productive and stuff is bumped off. I don't know if you would or not, but even if you didn't, most of us would probably say one theory is better than the other. What are we comparing these moral theories with when we say one is better, morally better than the other? There must be something higher that transcends both your moral theory and this other theory where is more pragmatic. Right. So what do you ultimately evaluate your moral theory with?
So my thought is that this value of equality is something that's actually implicit in the kind of beings we are. That norm is for a variety of reasons a norm that instantiates a particularly successful kind of society, both for the individuals and the society as a whole. And this is a norm that's going to apply to human agents, because it's something that is distinctive of human agents. I think I could say more about that, but that's the idea. Now, you might imagine that maybe there are some kinds of beings that are similarly rational. They're capable of complex thought, but biologically they're just composed differently, and they have a different set of inclinations, and their potentialities and their possibilities for living in groups are different than ours. Well, at that point, you're really at a loss of what to say about those guys, because this logic and this whole system applies to human agents. It's not going to apply to these different kinds of beings who just share our rationality. Or it may or may not. It may or may not. That said, I guess I could just stop there. So there wouldn't be this extraordinary universal applicability, but it'd be pretty darn universal applicability. It's something that applies to human agents, human communities, human societies.
So I have a question for Professor Scarafa. So you touched on kind of this subjectivity of having this intrinsic morality to humans, and how that kind of facilitates our understanding or our composition of a society, right? It is subjective, and yet I know you said a few times that it's intrinsic. And so I know Dr. Kirk?
You just call me Kirk, that's
Kirk. Fine. And I know Kirk is more of this altruistic morality is what is the foundation of our society, or what will build a healthy society well. While on the other side, the humanistic side, there's more of, it is a bit subjective, it's more subjective, however intrinsic in some senses. So I was wondering if you could like flesh out the intrinsicness of our morality.
So I take it the big distinction isn't necessarily an altruistic or self-interested distinction. You said altruistic.
Yeah.
And the other term you use is an intrinsic.
So,
yeah, and sometimes you use subjective.
yeah.
And so those have particular meanings as well, or traditional meanings. I took the key contrast between our two pictures of spirituality and maybe ultimately of value, I'm not sure, as having to do with the continuity of these things, like value and spirituality, with the natural world, with the world that, with the natural world, as opposed to a world that you can only detect through, as Dr. Dunstan said, through some sort of sixth sense. That's the main distinction. Now, there's a further question about, the universal applicability of these values, or of morality, or something like that. But I think that might be orthogonal. I mean, I think you could have views, naturalistic views, that are highly universally applicable. There's this one guy, you might be familiar, Immanuel Kant, who thought that all rational agents are bound by the same morality, but not by fiat of God or anything like that. It's just by virtue of their reason, something like that. But it's all continuous with the natural world, I think.
It's just in the sense that when morality becomes more subjective, and when you try to apply it universally like Kant tries to do, the problem of subjectivity becomes confusing. Because if we're supposed to be bound by a moral law that we're all supposed to follow, well then, how do we determine, like the determination of that moral law? If it is based on us, we are subjective, so we will naturally disagree. And that's where I see that breakdown. Right? Because we're trying to apply something universally, but the essence of it is not universal, it's subjective. And so my understanding of Kirk's is where we take an altruistic, so unsubjective, but objective morality, and then place it. And so it's no longer a subjective determination of rules, it's an objective one. And so that's where I see it fitting better with a more flourishing and cohesive society, because you don't have the problem of subjectivity.
So let me respond with just I think just a famous, almost hackneyed objection to the story that you're trying to tell. It's a famous response where you might think, okay, one answer to what imbues value, justifies or validates value, is the fiat of a deity. But there's a famous, ancient response to this. So does that mean that any fiat that the deity might make could imbue something with value, be it some really horrible thing, killing Isaac's son, or just think of like something awful, or is there a sense in which value, God it obeys and is constrained by value, in which case you still need to give some sort of answer as about what that is that's independent of the deity. And so you're kind of in the same, the question remains a live one.
Sorry.
No, I should definitely defer at this point.
Well, I think there is a problem. Like, I understand that we can create moral systems. There's no problem at all coming up with moral theories and moral systems. And one of them is, as you have described, that there are certain things that really enhance our ability to get along together in community and flourish and thrive and so forth. However, what I would observe in history is that the track record of humanity is that we most of the time don't do that to larger or lesser degrees. People tend to think they're exceptions to the rule. They tend to take advantage and so forth. What happens if a person wakes up one morning and says, why in the world should I observe the principle of equality when obviously for this situation here, I can definitely enhance my own survivability. Genghis Khan, for example, who from a Darwinian perspective is probably one of the most successful humans that ever lived because more people carry his genes than anyone else. But you point out that basically the ball comes into my court. Well then, what about divine command theory and so forth? What if, like as Euthyphro's dilemma, I think that's what you're referring to, the gods tomorrow afternoon decree something else? My own view on this, and this is my own personal opinion you're getting again, but Alvin Plantinga, the philosopher Alvin Plantinga, defines God as a maximally great being. And part of that is maximal excellence, and he defines that as that degree of excellence beyond which it is not logically possible to be more excellent. So there's this idea in Christianity in 1 Timothy that the law, all these rules were actually made for the lawless. They define what's wrong, but they do not describe a good person. And so I don't really see myself as following divine command theory. Rather, what I see myself as doing is going in a direction of maximal excellence. So I would define good, an activity is good if and only if it corresponds to the way a maximally excellent being is. Now there's a possible problem with that, and that is, well, how do you know, what defines a maximally excellent being? What standard are we using here? So let's postulate a standard of moral virtues that are absolutely flawless. And in Euthyphro's dilemma, the question was posed by Socrates, is something good because the gods like it, or do the gods like it because it is good, in which case there's an external thing there. So let's postulate the existence of an external standard of flawless excellence, and you got two beings, and both of them are flawless when you compare them to this standard of just absolute beauty and everything else. But one being is flawless in virtue of the fact that it refers to that standard and conforms its behavior perfectly to that standard. The other being manages to be perfect and flawless without even referring to that standard. At that point, this being is more excellent than that one, and so this is the maximally excellent being. And so maximal excellence describes this ability to be the origin of beauty, justice, and so forth, without needing to refer to some external standard. Well, the question, of course, is, does such a being exist? And I think Plantinga does a good job of giving an ontological argument that if there's a maximally great being in even one possible world, then necessarily such a being exists in all possible worlds. Not a proof by any stretch of the imagination that, I've got a firm foundation for my moral theory, but what I do say is that at the very least, I won't wake up tomorrow morning and say, why should I follow this moral theory? As long as I believe that there's a maximally excellent being in existence. Whereas if I put the principle of equality as my way to go, I can wake up tomorrow morning, why should I treat everybody equally when it's advantageous for me not to? And millions of people do it every day. And humanity still survives just fine, and we reproduce and whatever. And I wouldn't say, maybe just fine is not a good word to use, because I don't think things are just fine when you look at the news.
My worldview is that humans have intrinsic worth. How is the Christian view of God's image different from this? What makes one view superior over the other?
I guess being a Christian, probably should give a stab at that one. I don't think it's different, because if you are created in the image and likeness of God, and image and likeness, people wonder, well, what is that? Like, people don't picture the Trinity walking around with two legs, 2 ears and so forth. The member of the Trinity who represents God in this world, who is the exact, all the fullness of deity dwells within would, of course Jesus had 2 arms and 2 legs, but I'm getting off on a track here. Bottom line is that it's intrinsic to us. If we are created in God's image and likeness, that is part of what we are. part of our essence, and therefore we do have intrinsic value. But I have an objective grounds now for believing that we do. My objective grounds are God has created us in his image and likeness, both male and female. He stipulates that. Now, of course, whether God exists is a different question. If I found out tomorrow there was no God, then immediately I would have to reevaluate how I assign value and significance to every person here. But if you believe we have intrinsic value and worth, but the question always remains, why? Why would you believe that? What is it that objectively gives a person intrinsic value and worth, as opposed to how much money they have, how good looking they are, their athletic performance, and so on and so forth, which I think is irrelevant to a person's intrinsic value and worth. It's just intrinsic in virtue of what a human being is.
Thank you for that response. Dr. Scaffa, would you like to address that?
Yeah, so this is, so I guess I'm just not, I'm not particularly moved by the thought that you can't make sense of the idea of intrinsic value and worth in naturalistic terms. I'm trying to think of the best way to articulate this thought. So I take it that what you're looking for is something. I guess the way to articulate this thought. So maybe the thought's a little more complicated than that. One might be maybe some way of thinking about this question of intrinsic value and worth is chasing after a ghost, right? And getting. So what exactly does it mean? What does it even mean to say that something has intrinsic value or worth? And then how would we adjudicate the claim that bearing a certain relation to a deity is what gives it intrinsic value and worth? And so I guess that's the question. So my approach is just something. I just want to just back up and try to be sort of commonsensical about this and say, look, I know what it is to value my life. I know what it is to feel a sense of meaning from what my life is about. And then I can say, look, there are certain kinds of institutions that make it possible for me to realize this sense of value and this sense of meaning. And it turns out that historically, and given the kinds of creatures we are, there are certain particular kinds of institutions governed by certain kinds of norms that make it possible for a lot of us to achieve this sense of value and this sense of meaning. And we don't have to try to locate this notion of intrinsic value and worth in this sort of heavy-duty metaphysical way. It can just drop away. It can just drop off.
To both professors, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you both agree that from your worldviews, each person deserves value. How would you explain from your worldview a person who feels no value for people? Example, a mass murderer who feels no guilt.
I'm not sure exactly. I wish the person were here because I would like to ask them what exactly am I supposed to explain. I could explain their possibility. There are people like this. I could tell a kind of social scientific story how they come about. But I'm not sure what exactly explain means in this context. Do you want to take a stab?
I could take a wild stab and maybe, from my perspective, I mean, if I did not believe that there are humans who have intrinsic value and so forth, having been raised in a rural area with animals and spending thousands of hours with animals and seeing that equality is definitely not a factor there's always a pecking order, I would tend to take the same view. In the animal world, if it's not useful, it's down at the bottom of the pecking order. At the top, it is. But I think the question is, how would I explain it if in fact there are God-ordained values that are placed on us? How would I explain that someone feels there isn't? I think we have moral intuitions. Like from a Christian perspective, it says that God has put moral intuitions within us so that even though, for example, both of us might have different grounds for our value for people, we both feel people are valuable. We're just maybe appealing to different grounds there. But it's entirely possible that a person, because of their childhood, because of their upbringing, because of the horrendous situation they may have been involved in as a child and so forth, that their own moral intuitions have just been trampled on. They have huge issues in other areas that have basically debilitated their ability to make good moral decisions. From a Christian perspective, it talks about this idea that the conscience has been seared, or people actually reaching a state where they have no conscience. So that's entirely possible, even if God has given us value, that we as individuals would disagree or just not believe that.
Can you expand on the obligation of somebody for all of society, and that's why they should do good things? So if someone is like badly abused, or they're in an environment where they're just constantly beat or constantly abused by somebody else, like, and they can't see past that, right? I guess oftentimes they become these murderers, or they become these horrendous people. Why should that person care about society as a whole when his reality, like, he can't see society as a whole? You know, like, why should he care about the good of society?
One response is one way of taking that question is what might motivate this person to care. That it's not clear what would motivate this person to care. No matter what story you told,
Yeah.
They're just broken. Now, so I guess my thought's going to be that fortunately there's a solid core of participants in societies like Canada that actually have these egalitarian intuitions and these altruistic intuitions, and they organize their lives around them. And they do care about these things, and they're just instilled in them. These values are instilled in them by their society, and also part of the story is by their biological makeup. That's just basic tendencies that we have. And it turns out, being the social beings that we are, our lives go really well individually and collectively when we act on and are shaped in accordance with many of these moral intuitions, particularly the egalitarian ones.
Okay. Is there any response that you would like
Well,
to say?
it would be quite similar. Like, he did state that there are people who are broken, was the word you used, who really have been injured. And I know it's because I have dialogued with well over 1,000 students one-on-one, and I'm not a professional counselor. It is an enormous, if a person's physically badly injured, it's an enormous problem to restore that person back to physical health. And in the same way, it is an enormous problem to restore someone who's been badly psychologically injured, spiritually injured. It's not an easy thing. We both acknowledge there are people who are we're all hurt to some degree. We all carry scars, but some people are deeply hurt and deeply scarred because of what went on in their childhood. I don't know if that even answers. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like the question I was actually trying to ask, I didn't flesh it out properly, but what obligation does a person whose society is like it's just a child in Africa, for example, who has nobody, kind of how you mentioned it, just cradling through the wilderness, why does that person have an obligation to society because of the general good of humankind when they themselves have been so badly, what obligation do they have? Isn't that kind of where the moral system falls apart, in the sense when you're thinking of the good of everyone, when you have no motivation to do anything for the good of everyone? You have no reason to care about the good of the world. You're just trying to get by yourself, whatever means necessary.
Especially when you've been badly treated by society.
Yeah, exactly.
So the thought is that There are boundaries of application of morality, where it makes sense to even talk about morality. Morality is a group enterprise. It's a social enterprise, is the thought. It's a way of living our lives as species beings. People who are marginalized from this aren't given this opportunity. People that find themselves, without community, well, they won't survive very long. But insofar as they do, it just doesn't apply there. In conditions of extreme scarcity, where social and communal living and projects aren't possible, morality is it's a mistake to think morality even applies in those circumstances on this way of looking at things. You're beyond morality at that point. Morality is something that's a feature of our social lives, and it makes sense of and makes possible certain ways of living.
So if we're
together.
beyond morality, couldn't that person just do whatever they wanted? And I mean, couldn't that person just do whatever means necessary to survive, right? And that wouldn't be an issue. Sorry, I'm just kind of trying to get that beyond morality thing. Like morality no longer applies to that person, is what you're trying to say?
Morality is a group project, and when someone's outside of the group, when someone's outside of the group, it's almost a kind of mistake to think in moral terms, in terms of the obligations of this person, because the obligations presuppose that there's this group project that we're all engaged in together. And if they're not, if engaging in that project is not a possibility for them due to scarcity or these kinds of things, the norms that constitute that group project, they don't apply. I think I think that is part of this story.
Yeah.
That's if you're just by yourself, I think as you're implying, there's no one else to be moral with. But from the Christian perspective, there's two directions for morality. There would be me and my relationship with other humans, and if I'm by myself or been marginalized or kicked out, then that's kind of over. There's nothing there to do, but there still would exist the vertical obligation to God to not cheat, not go pillage those humans over there that are actually, they've got all the stuff, eh? Like, let's say we're talking trilogy, The Girl with a Bow. Hunger Games, We're talking Hunger Games here. Yeah. So there was still a moral obligation not to just turn into an animal and pillage and kill. From my perspective, and it's easier said than done, it would be better to die of starvation than to kill someone else and so that I could eat them.
Yeah.
And that's just my moral, what I understand maximal excellence to be. Whereas from a purely survival mode, that would be a stupid thing.
Yeah.
Although not really, because if they're healthier than well, anyways.
Can I interject?
But that's exactly what I was trying to get at. Like, if somebody is no longer constrained by society's moral laws, couldn't they just do whatever they wanted? Couldn't they just murder 1 million people? Like, couldn't they just,
So let me make 2 points, and these are, I think, key points of contact. One is that, on this story, there isn't this other level. There's no sixth sense required to tap into this non-naturalistic part of the universe. But the other part, a fundamental part of this story, is that we are species beings, and there's a way that Aristotle puts this that kind of gets the idea across. If you're a being who doesn't live in political community, what Aristotle says, you're either a beast or you're a god. I mean, it's a fundamental feature of us that we live our lives in communities, and ultimately political communities. And that's an inescapable fact for most of us, unless we're broken as beings of our kind. And occasionally people do get broken. The contingencies of history move in a way where societies and the possibility of community is really, destroyed. But once that happens, then the possibility of our realizing our species' nature is precluded.
Thank you, John. We are reaching the end of our time now.